or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Security Council is holding today a public debate on the situation in the Middle East, notably the Palestinian territory. The Zionist occupation has savagely continued bombarding the Gaza Strip, causing more deaths among the Palestinian civilians. Morocco is intending to speed up its expansionist policy in attracting international mining groups in the region in order to legitimize and consolidate its military operation of Western Sahara. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. The deadline for submitting candidacy declarations for presidential election of September 7th is July 18th at midnight. Since the beginning of the operation, following the calling of the electoral body, the presidential contenders at this electoral deadline, whether independent or on behalf of political parties, withdrew the signature subscription forms at the headquarters of the Independent National Authority of Election, ANI, at the Palace of the Nation here in Algiers. In the Western Sahara file, Morocco, which has been shamelessly exploiting the natural resources of Western Sahara for years, intends to speed up its expansionist policy by strengthening the attraction of international mining groups to the region in order to legitimize and consolidate its military occupation of the territory. More details with Zahid Bougazi.
As a sign of the intensification of this policy of plundering Western Sahara's resources, the Moroccan National Office for Hydrocarbons and Mines, ONIM, headed by Amina Ben Khadra, was recently given responsibility for granting mining permits in Western Sahara. Previously, these permits were managed by the Mines Directorate of the Moroccan Ministry of Energy Transition and Sustainable Development, headed by Leila Ben Ali. The aim of ONIM's involvement is to make the region more attractive to international mining groups, explains a French media report stating that Amina Ben Khadra's department wants to increase the number of joint ventures with mining exploration juniors in order to pool risks. Morocco has a long history of appropriating Western Sahara and exploiting its natural resources. For many years, the Moroccan occupier has illegally exploited the territory's resources, thereby prolonging the conflict and the suffering of the Sahrawi people. The example of phosphate is emblematic. In 1947, the Spanish discovered the deposit that they named Fos Bucra, where the ore was easy to extract practically in the open air. Since the departure of the Spanish Bucra, ore has been mined and then marketed worldwide by the Sharifian Phosphate Office, OCP, in which King Mohammed VI is a shareholder. However, Western Sahara has been on the UN list of non-self-governing territories since 1963. In other words, Morocco does not have sovereignty over Western Sahara. Nor is it the administering power, since Spain has retained this status since 1965. Morocco is therefore the occupying power, administering the population and illegally exploiting the territory's resources.
The total of 5 attacks waged by the Zionist occupation army in the Gaza Strip, including one against an UNRWA school, has risen to 57. The Civil Defense of the Gaza Strip announced today that 57 Palestinians have been killed in 5 separate strikes by the Zionist army in the center, south and north of Gaza, including one on an UNRWA school. The first 3 fatal strikes took place near El Mawassi petrol station to the west of Khan Yunis, on a school run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, in the Nusayrat refugee camp. The UN Security Council is holding today a public debate on the situation in the Middle East, notably in the Palestinian territory. Russia, which holds the rotating presidency for the Security Council for the month of July, organized the meeting. The Security General's Chief of Staff, Earl Kosner Rattray, is expected to take stock of the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, where a high risk of famine persists. The meeting is centered on the challenges facing the UN to meet the humanitarian needs of Palestinians in Gaza. Several Zionist settlers have stormed the esplanade of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the occupied city of Al-Quds under the protection of the Zionist occupation police. The settlers entered the mosque in successive groups and performed Talmudic rituals in its courtyard. For its part, the police of the Zionist occupier have transformed the old city of Al-Quds into military barracks and deployed hundreds of units at short distance, notably at the gates of the Holy Mosque. The occupying forces also stepped up their military procedures in the old town of Al-Quds and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, while imposing restrictions on the entry of Palestinian worshippers. UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini has said that the destruction in Gaza and the West Bank is beyond description, adding that such targeting of humanitarian workers by the Israeli occupation forces has never been witnessed before. Asya Bikar has the details.
Lazzarini said Palestinians are in a living hell in both Gaza and the West Bank, adding that the escalation of the border with Lebanon is another threatening situation.
More than 2 million people are trapped in a living hell. They have been displaced repeatedly across the ravaged and increasingly lawless territory. Children and women are bearing the brunt of this brutal war. Acute food insecurity is claiming the lives of children and severely affecting women who often eat last and least. Thousands of children have been killed. Thousands more are struggling with new disabilities. Many have lost their limbs to amputation, their hearing to blasts, and their speech to shock and trauma. In the shadow of Gaza, another tragedy is unfolding in the West Bank. More than 500 Palestinians have been killed since October, including at least 130 children. Attacks by Israeli settlers, military incursions, and the destruction of homes and critical infrastructure are part of a system of oppression. The Israel-Lebanon border is simmering, threatening full-blown war.
The UNRWA chief said that refugees were not spared the Israeli attacks while seeking refuge in UN shelters.
Millions of Palestinian refugees across the region are anxious and afraid. Most have lived in camps for generations, awaiting a political solution to their plight. Palestinians are witnessing today the greatest tragedy since 1948. And as they have done for 75 years, they are looking to UNRWA for help. Mr. President, for decades the agency has been a force for stability across the region. It is a driver of human development for Palestinian refugees, providing public-like services such as education and healthcare. Today, however, UNRWA is staggering under the weight of relentless attacks. In Gaza, the agency has paid a terrible price. 195 of our colleagues have been killed. Nearly 190 installations have been damaged or destroyed, killing more than 500 people seeking United Nations protection. UNRWA personnel detained by the Israeli forces have reported mistreatment and torture. Our convoys have come under attack despite coordinating movement. In the West Bank, UNRWA's operational space is shrinking. Arbitrary measures imposed by Israel severely restrict the presence and movement of our staff. Violent protests outside our premises in East Jerusalem culminated in arson attacks.
Philippe Lazzarini said during all his career years, he has never witnessed such disregard to the facilities of UN workers and the rules of international order in conflict zones.
In more than 30 years of humanitarian work, I have never encountered such blatant disregard for the protected status of humanitarian workers, facilities and operation under international law. Turning a blind eye to this attack sets a dangerous precedent, undermining respect for the rules-based international order in other conflicts.
Let's recall that yesterday an airstrike by the Israeli occupation forces targeting an UNRWA school in a Nusayrat camp killed 23 people and wounded dozens of others.
Still in the Gaza Strip, the Zionist occupation has plundered more than 44 hectares of Palestinian land in the villages of Shabtin, Dir Ammar and Dir Qadis, west of Ramallah. The Commission for Resistance to the War and Settlements indicated that the dispossession aims to strengthen control over all the land surrounding two Zionist settlements which were built on Palestinian land. By seizing the land, the occupier also wants to falsify Palestinian geography, to prevent any communication between Palestinian towns and villages, and to prevent the creation of a viable Palestinian state. In this respect, the Commission affirmed that it would intensify its legal efforts with all its partners to thwart Zionist expansionist plans to control Palestinian land and the rights of Palestinians to their land. More than 500 violations against Palestinian journalists have been committed by the Zionist occupation forces since the beginning of 2024. Speaking at a weekly sit-in held in the El Birah Cultural Center in support of Palestinian detainees in occupation prisons, the chairman of the Journalists Union's Freedom Committee, Mohammed Al-Laham, was quoted by the Palestinian news agency Wafa as saying that 44 journalists have been killed in the first half of 2024. Saeed Bougazi has the details.
According to Mohammed El-Laham, the number of journalists injured has risen to 108, around half of whom were injured by bullets, missile fragments and projectiles, while 26 others were arrested. Data published on the website of the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate and reported by Wafa also show that 51 media employees have been arrested by Zionist forces out of a total of around 100 detained since 7 October 2023. In this connection, the chairman of the Freedoms Committee of the Journalists Syndicate referred to the terrifying accounts of the horrors of assaults in Zionist jails reported by journalists, including sexual, verbal, and physical harassment, deploring the silence of the international community on the Palestinian question. The chairman of the Palestinian Prisoners and Ex-Prisoners Affairs Committee, Qaddoura Fares, called for a worldwide strike on 3rd August, a decisive day to save Gaza and the Palestinian prisoners. Meanwhile, the General Supervisor of Official Media in Palestine, Ahmed Assaf, said that the targeting of Palestinian media by the Zionist occupation army was a systematic policy, Wafa news agency reported. Speaking at the headquarters of the Public Broadcasting Authority in Ramallah to the French Consul General in Palestine, Nicolas Cassianid, Ahmed Assaf said that despite the obstacles facing the official Palestinian media due to the actions of the Zionist army, they are keeping pace with the development of new media.
The Palestinian authorities in Gaza have said that over the past 2 days, more than 320 Palestinians have been admitted to hospital in the enclave with severe burns caused by internationally banned weapons used by the Zionist occupation army. In a statement, the Gaza Media Office said that doctors' assessments suggested that the third-degree burns on the bodies of the patients, many of whom died, were caused by the weapons used by the Zionist occupation army. According to the source, these were chemical or thermal weapons, the use of which against human beings is prohibited internationally. The Zionist genocidal war in Gaza, now it's in its 9th month, has claimed 38,712 lives and wounded at least 89,166 people. The NGO's Doctors Without Borders has said that hospitals in the Gaza Strip lack the most basic necessities, which will lead to the death of more citizens every second that the war continues. The organization said in a statement that for 9 months, the Gaza Strip has witnessed almost continuous death and psychological trauma, and no place has been spared from bloodshed. Majid Mila reports.
Doctors Without Borders note that medical teams in Gaza are exposed to unbearable pressure with every attack amid a depleted health system. It added, our teams are working throughout the Gaza Strip to provide basic and life-saving care for those injured in brutal Zionist attacks, and they are also forced to flee for their lives. The World Health Organization said in a report this month that the health sector in Gaza needs 80,000 liters of fuel per day, and that the last supplies that arrived in the Strip at the end of last month were between 195,000 and 200,000 liters. It confirmed that hospitals are facing a fuel shortage that threatens the interruption of vital services and the death of injured people due to the delay of ambulances. The organization also warned of the escalation of the medical services crisis in the Gaza Strip, especially in light of the Zionist evacuation orders in Gaza City, which hinder the treatment of the injured. It pointed out that out of 36 hospitals in Gaza, only 13 are partially operating, and there are a total of 11 failed hospitals in the Strip, 3 of which were forced to temporarily stop and 4 are partially operating.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. 5 people, including 3 children, have been killed in separate Zionist strikes on southern Lebanon. 3 Syrian children were killed in an enemy raid on farmland in the village of Tut Said. 2 other Syrians were killed in a Zionist drone strike in Kfar Tibnit. On Tuesday morning, several forest fires were started in other towns in southern Lebanon by Zionist armies' bombardments using phosphorus, reported Lebanese media. The international president of the non-governmental organization Médecins Sans Frontières, Christos Christou, has said that a third of those wounded in the war in Sudan are women and children under the age of 10. The hospitals supported by MSF, the only facilities operating in the country, have been the target of repeated attacks, he said, in Port Sudan, 1,000 kilometers away from the capital, Khartoum. Back to the country, the Daily Al-Mujahid, in collaboration with the Mashhad Al-Shahid Association, organised a conference today at the newspaper's headquarters dedicated to the memory of Nelson Mandela and his relationship with our national liberation struggle. The Mujahid Forum was organised on the eve of the Nelson Mandela International Day. The day is celebrated under the theme, "It's still in our hands to combat poverty and inequality." The event was covered by Hafida Medheb, who met with the ambassador of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic to Algiers, Mr. Taleb Abdelkader Homar, and told her the following.
South Africa today is considered one of the supporters and defenders of the Sahrawi cause. It will be victorious despite the intransigence of the Moroccan regime and despite it falling into the arms of the Zionist entity and the colonial powers. Seeking help from it will not achieve goals. Today the Palestinian resistance has demonstrated the inability of the Zionist entity, and those who seek help see them as the losing horse. They will only reap immortality, vice, and the selling of sacred things. The Sahrawi cause will triumph just as the revolution of November 1st triumphed and Mandela and the people of South Africa triumphed.
The forum was attended by a representative from the Embassy of South Africa in the capital Algiers, who had this to say.
My name is Bernard Lehodi, Chargé Affairs of the Embassy of South Africa. Thank you. Also, thank you for the question. The relationship between South Africa and Algeria continues to remain important, both politically and economically. Politically, we continue to work with Algeria at bilateral level. We continue to work to ensure that cooperation agreements that govern various sectors between the two countries are concluded so that we can continue to have economic benefits between the two countries. In terms of politics around the world and in Africa, we continue to also work together on issues of peace and security on the African continent, even at the African Union. So we continue to collaborate in terms of for the fight to have peace on the continent, including also the fight for Palestinian people, and the people in the Western Sahara in the camps, so that we can have the people of Western Sahara hosting their flags at the rightful place where it's supposed to be hosted in the occupied territories.
It's worth recalling that Nelson Mandela had a special relationship and a very close ties with Algeria, his second homeland. Now a reminder of today's top stories. The Security Council is holding today a public debate on the situation in the Middle East, notably the Palestinian territory. The Zionist occupation has savagely continued bombarding the Gaza Strip, causing more death among the Palestinian civilians. Morocco is intending to speed up its expansionist policy in attracting international mining groups in the region in order to legitimize and consolidate its military occupation of Western Sahara. That's it for today's News Bulletin. I invite you to listen to a special cultural program by my colleague Asya Bakar. Stay tuned on Radio Algeria International.
Our Talk, a weekly program with guests,